Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? It is really, really hot still, and I have one of those feast or famine situations going on. Except this time it's not video topics; it's gigging, and I have two gigs back to back. I have one tonight, and I have one. I've got to work tomorrow. I have one Sunday night, and I knew they were coming up, and I forgot when. So didn't get a lot of sleep last night. So it's going to be kind of a long weekend. But so I was thinking maybe I won't make a video today. But I was thinking about this one topic. I started to go back and watch some of Runeslinger's older videos because when I first discovered his channel, sometime around a year ago, I'd seen videos before, but I actually kind of dove in after watching a few videos and said, let me see what this guy is all about, because I became intrigued. I watched a bunch of his playlists, and one of them was called Main Ideas. The other one's called, I think, On Simulation. I ended up watching all the videos eventually, but those two playlists have a lot of really cool stuff in them. But I hadn't watched those videos in quite some time. So I went back recently and started watching them again, and it was really interesting to see like how I perceived them differently. What things I kind of picked up, where I kind of come to some of the same conclusions myself, or whether through talking with him or other people. I've just had an interesting year in terms of my views on role-playing games. Anyhow, this video really isn't really about that, although I will link this stuff. But in this one video that I was looking at, and I think I was looking at a couple days ago, it's called Narrative, Voice, and Immersion 1, because there's a second one. He references Same Old G making this comment, and I can't argue with the comment as such. Like, it's not anything that Same Old G said that I believe was wrong. I just have a different perspective on it. So I wanted to kind of give my perspective, but I kind of have to frame this first, really fast. Essentially, what Anthony was talking about in his video is the idea of how when we're using a narrative voice, when we're playing a role-playing game, we tend to use things like maybe the first person or the third person or a mishmash or whatever. And so I'm going to go this really briefly, and he goes into a much better explanation of all this. But most people kind of approach the game beginning in what he calls the second person, which is kind of like this schizophrenic mishmash of sometimes you're using the first person and you're saying, I do this, I do that, I walk over here. And sometimes you're using the third person and say, well, my character steps into the plane, or Spencer Halliday pulls out his gun. But it's not very consistent. I tend to do this every once in a while myself. I was thinking about it, and when I've gone back and watched clips of me playing, which is always interesting, or just thought about it, usually when I kind of slip into the third person, it's when I'm kind of giving you some extra information about the character, or I say something like, Philippe looks dumbfounded, he doesn't know what to do here, and it's usually when it's comical. And because I'm usually not giving you a lot of information about the thoughts of my character, when I'm playing a game with you, but there's those moments when I'm thinking this is too good to pass up, and it's not something I do consciously. It just sort of happens. Anyhow, then there's the first person, what Anthony would call the first person unintentional, which is very much like you say, I do this, I do that, I walk over here, but it's kind of in that really unintentional new gamer way. You're not intending to have this be immersed in the character. It's almost as if you're playing checkers. I'm moving over here, I'm going, that sort of thing. And then there's the intentional first person, where you get into much more detail. You start to inhabit the character, and I like to do that a lot. Not that there's a better way, there's just, these are the kind of narrative voices. Then something he would call the third person unintentional, where you're just you're not really putting a lot of thought in this. You're saying, well, my character walks over here, Spencer Halliday opens the door, I pull my gun out. Or the third person intentional, which is kind of almost like you're narrating a story, you're writing a book. Spencer Halliday struts onto the airfield, lights up a lucky strike, and surveys the DC-2 as they're loading the crates. He smiles, anxious to get his gold back to Barbados, where he can plan his next move. He strides confidently, blah, blah, blah. So, anyhow, in this video that Anthony made, he was talking about how at one point Same Old G, and I think Same Old G was having a discussion with Sean Driscoll, and this is kind of a response video Anthony had made. Same Old G talked about he liked to be in the use a third person narrative when he's playing a character that he doesn't particularly like, because he doesn't want to. I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth, but this is kind of how it was coming across. He doesn't want to use I and really identify that strongly with a character that he just didn't like or found reprehensible, or what have you. My perspective on this is somewhat different, and that's certainly very defensible, so I'm not arguing. I'm just saying I like to do that. For me, I never really thought of it that much as, role-playing in the beginning. I knew it was a role-playing game, and, I just kind of naturally started to inhabit my character, but it wasn't my intent to have this deep, immersive role-play. I was going to go kill some orcs, and, this is really cool, and I'm going to be able to cast magic missile and fireball and all that good junk. But Um, Over time, I started to play characters that were different, and some characters were a lot like me, and I kind of played an avatar of myself. But over time, I found that like a personality would emerge for each character I played, and sometimes it was a little intentional at first, and sometimes it was just kind of like what showed up. Having discussion, like, or I made a comment on a thread that or post Lee, your humble game master, put on the RPG Brigade, where he's talking about how oftentimes he's noticed in watching like old school Renaissance play that people tend not to be as immersed in their character. And one of the comments I made was, it's kind of like, in those games, we started to develop through experience. We kind of held back and were a little more detached. I don't think this was on purpose, but let me see if this guy lives. Let's see what kind of guy shows up. So anyhow, but often I ended up playing some characters that were not nice people. I could tell you that Spencer Halliday is not a great person. He's not a reprehensible person. But I started to really enjoy, and this was not a conscious thing I started to do. It just sort of happened. When I play a character, I start to really like to put myself in their shoes and figure, who is this person? Who are they? I'm going to play a person that may be like me, but often I like to play a person that's completely different than me. And sometimes their complete difference is they're willing to do things that I am not willing to do. They're willing to be a nasty person. I think part of this is that we all have these base drives, these darker emotions, these darker feelings or motivations that we simply don't act on because we've learned to be decent people. We've learned that you don't do these sort of things, or it makes your skin crawl even when you're thinking some of these things. I don't know about you, but sometimes I have thoughts I wish I didn't have. But this character, on the other hand, well, they give into these dark thoughts, and I like to explore where that goes. Not in a sick way where I'm getting my jollies off of it, but it's kind of interesting to see, what would it be like to be this guy, or what would this person that doesn't mind killing people, doesn't mind extorting money out of people, doesn't mind, completely destroying people's lives in one way, shape, or form, who doesn't mind climbing up the ladder to power, doesn't mind who he steps on, etc. What would it be like to be that person? And sometimes it's been a conscious effort to say, I wonder what it's like to be, Duras, the evil wizard. But often it was just like, well, this is what this guy has turned out to be. Okay, I'm going to play him like he seems. And it's funny, I talked about this a couple times before, but I had a moment in a Lamentations of the Flame Princess game where I'm playing this very nasty guy. And I didn't go into lurid detail about all the bad things he did. Of course, he executed some people, but it's D&D, it's okay. It's other guy was bad too. He needed his stuff. But I'll never forget the one time I mentioned something he did in his downtime, and it was very much, I said because that's I tend to inhabit, Duras as a character. I said he did something particularly heinous and reprehensible, and everybody, it was like somebody scratching a needle on a record player for a second. Everybody's like, oh my God, that's sick. How could you say that? It's like, it's not me. That's what the character did. I mean, I learned there were some boundaries in that group, and so I made a mistake that time. But my intent wasn't to get my jollies out of doing something sick. It's like, well, this is what this guy would do. And so I enjoy playing characters that I find reprehensible. Do I go out of my way to do it? No. But if I discover that that's what they're like, then I don't mind, inhabiting that person and playing them that way, and still saying because I like to kind of, have this experience. It's, oftentimes for me, I say I like a lot, but really it seems to be like what I do, what I naturally kind of gravitate towards. I was never an actor. I acted in a couple plays, one in high school, one in elementary school. But I always liked imitating people. I've always liked, kind of making characters of other people. And I've noticed my youngest daughter does that too. Is one of those people who just can impersonate people at the drop of a hat. And I'm not so bad too. And so for whatever reason, that's what I do. And so if a character is evil, okay, I don't mind doing that as well. And I'm able to, I think, put up some kind of barrier. Sometimes it gets a little dark. Sometimes like, wow, that's really, it gets a little uncomfortable. But I don't mind it getting a little uncomfortable. Maybe that's why I'm intrigued by games like Circle of Hands or Broken Rooms or some of the darker stuff that you can get in some other games. So that's just a different perspective. What do you think about all that? Good? Evil? You don't care? Or are you going to do a third person?